Okay, well, it's really good opportunity to be here today and chat a little bit about some interesting things.
Yes. So, I'm Gene Cunningham. This is Guy Goodell. He's a pastor, former baseball umpire, former supervisor of EMS, things like that. So he's one of the few people in the world I can call my elder, and he's worthwhile as an elder. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
We're here we have wonderful conversations at breakfasts about various items that we've studied for 150 years, and literally, and we thought we'd put this on tape. I'm semi-competent. He's semi-competent now with turning on a camera, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a watermark. I'll get rid of that. It only cost me $2.99. So we're gonna start talking around the subject of Aristotle and ethics, and he's going to tell you the Greek name.
Oh, the Nicomachean Ethics.
Yeah, that's it. So we're gonna, but that's the hub of the wheel. We're also going to discuss the Bible, which is his forte. He's been a pastor for 60 years.
67.
That's impossible. 67 years, and so he always refers back to the Old Testament, and we both read the book by Dershowitz called The Genesis of Justice,
mm-hmm.
which for me was brilliant because it explained the point of the Pentateuch. It's an evolution of humans to a point where they had a civilized society and it was just,
mm-hmm.
and it was brilliantly done. I spent most of my life thinking about, and so oftentimes trying to figure out the Tao, which is Lao Tzu,
mm-hmm.
and I've read Asian philosophies, and I've integrated it with mythologies and with the Bible and with philosophers, Greek philosophers. Now we talked about, we're going to go to see Aristotle. Aristotle was really kind of a historical focal point for the beginning of science and logic. Anything else? That's about it, right? That's not
right.
bad.
Yeah.
He's a student of Plato, and we don't want to overwhelm this presentation with facts, names, and numbers. We want to talk about the ideas that we're trying to discuss so that everybody can get it. And the concept I've had ever since college was that philosophy is not a historical study of terms. It's actually a love of wisdom and trying to understand things. And we work on that. And we are surprisingly close, considering we come at problems from a different perspective. No, same perspective, different approach. So we're going to base it on Aristotle, the ethics, and you can pick that up on anywhere online. Anything you want to add at this point?
You know, one of the things that I think we're going to do is, we said that all through philosophy, if you study the philosophers, you'll find that they tried to answer three questions. Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? And we decided to take only one question primarily for each presentation because we will keep it around 10 or 15 minutes. And Gene will focus primarily on the Aristotelian concept and any legal aspects involved in it. And then I will try to show parallels between that and the biblical teachings, especially in the book of Proverbs.
Yeah. And it all blends together. And that's a sign that there's a internal consistency that's worth observing. Most philosophical schools have internal inconsistencies that really basically spell their own demise. But here's not so. And the reason is we're dealing with humans and with natural law and divine law, which would actually be natural law. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, you also mentioned something too, every time we discuss what's happening in society today, is the degeneration of a moral code. Mm-hmm. And what we find in these philosophers is, even if we disagree with them or they disagree with each other, they all agree you've got to have some kind of moral standard in order for society to work.
Yeah. Yes, we've also done a lot of work in the area of the Founding Fathers. And what was the book name?
Original Intent by David Barton.
Yeah. Original Intent, a recommended book. The entire Founding Fathers were Christian based. Most of them were active Christians. Majority probably were pastors, and some were deists. And of course, that's what a lot of people like to quote the deists, but they still believed in a God. The thing that my whole point is, and I don't want to get lost on this, is that human beings are tribal by default. Period. We're tribal. We're just like horses and gorillas. And the thing that distinguished, at least the United States, from that perspective, is that sure, we're tribal, but we agreed to protect the individual. And how do you protect the individual? By the assumption of a consistent moral code. If you do not have a moral code, you have a tribe, you have little tribes fighting with other little tribes, and it's taken over by a big tribe, and now you have history of Europe 101. Mm-hmm. So it's a moral code. Even the bad guys 100 years ago still believed in the moral code, and they knew when they did something wrong. So see how easy it is to get lost in the weeds here. Would you please go over the three aspects? I think that's a good place to start, and then we can move on from there.
The three questions?
Three questions,
okay.
Yeah.
First question we talked about was the question of where did I come from? And the second one was, why am I here? That answers, as Gene said the other day when we were discussing it, that indicates life with purpose. And I don't think you can have purpose without the moral code. If you eliminate the moral code, you have no clear purpose, and what you have is you have everybody contributing to what he thinks in his own eyes is right. So we want to look at where we come from, why we're here, and the third one will be, where am I going to go when I die? And interestingly enough, even though philosophers disagreed with how to get where you were going when you died, they all agreed you were going somewhere when you died, that you didn't just simply end up in a grave and decay, but the real you was something else. So let me comment on the first one. Where did I come from? Aristotle referred to the prime mover as the source of life. Plato referred to the one. Plotinus referred to the doctrine of emanations, that there was a great spiritual entity out there somewhere, and we came out from that entity, and he said eventually we would simply return to it. And other philosophers took different positions. The philosopher Epictetus was quoted by the Apostle Paul when Paul went to argue at Athens, which was the seat of Greek philosophy in his day. And he noticed that when he got there, that these philosophers were arguing back and forth from the philosophers that they had studied, but they had some big altar built there, and they had different gods in different places. And then on this altar, they put down to the unknown God. And Paul said, let me tell you who he is. And then he quoted their philosopher, Epictetus, who said, in God, we live and move and have our being. And from that point on, he began to present Jesus Christ as the resurrected incarnate God that could save them from their sins. So origins, when we talk about the origins, each philosopher may differ as to exactly how the origin. You remember the story of the cave by Plato? And Plato said, what we have down here and what we see every day is a shadow. He said, we think this is real because it's right here. But he said, for example, if you look at this tree over here, you see what you call a tree, and you're trained from birth to call it a tree, but it's not really a tree. It's a reflection of reality, and the reality is somewhere in the distant outer space or whatever. And that's what real treeness is. To illustrate that.
Treeness, by the way, is a term of art. Philosophers use the NESS to contain the essence of something. This has cupness.
Okay, gotcha.
And it doesn't have to be the shape, but it has the nature of a cup, so it has cupness.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, no, that's good. That fits right in.
Yeah.
So Plato had this idea that to illustrate this to people who were not grasping his concept, he said if you put a man in a cave facing a wall and you chain him to where he cannot move and he cannot turn his head right or left, up or down, he has to look straight ahead. Behind him, you put a parapet. And then behind the parapet, you put a blazing fire. And then you walk a wolf across the parapet. And what he sees walking on the wall there is what he calls a wolf. And that's his concept of wolfness. or his cupness, or whatever you would call it. And so he grows up believing that. But then one day he gets free and he's released from the cave, and he gets outside and he sees a real wolf, and he realizes that he's only been looking at shadows. Mm. And so and this is also what Paul says when he writes to the church at Corinth. He says, "Behold, now we see through a glass darkly, but one day face to face." And the concept is there, as you said. We don't know whether this is really a cup. If you take the philosophical, we know that it has cupness, but we don't know. But somewhere there might be something that is a more perfect image of that cup.
Yeah, the cupness is like a theory, and it has a nature. The nature is it could hold things, and you can hold it. So there's a general theory. It's not like there's some mystical cup floating in space this is reflecting. There is a primal nature to things. And this is all information now that physicists feel comfortable talking about. There's something else going on. Isn't "thus spake Zarathustra"?
Yeah.
I think that's when you leave the cave.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to imitate the sound. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not sure where we came from. All right. He is sure, but he has his own definition of knowledge. I'm not sure, but I have no problem with assessing the possibility of anything, because I'm just me. I'm just a guy who's trying to get as old as this guy. So we're not sure where we came from. There's a lot of evidence that there's something else out there, and I've talked to him a long time about. Obviously, he disagrees with evolution, so I looked into it, and I found that the Precambrian era, there's nothing in the Precambrian era that permits the theory of evolution to work to develop the Cambrian life forms. They don't exist. Where they come from? They evolved from stones. So we don't know where we came from. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of agendas about what to believe and what not to believe, and those agendas are driven politically and that sort of thing. So we don't know sort of really where we're going, but we sort of think there's something to it. And again, you'll find advanced physicists talking about these sorts of things, and spooky particles at a distance, and what very interesting metaphysical things. So what we can talk about is what we're doing here. And I guess we're kind of closing in on a closing for part one. What are we doing here? And what does it matter if we have ethics? And ethics is based upon some perception of a moral code. And Aristotle is very interesting in the way he looks at ethics. It'll be a little different than most modern Western people would think about how things look at things, because we're familiar with the Bible, with rules and things like that, with custom. He looked at it as one book that we looked at said as in a biological fashion. He's trying to find out what really works. It gets to the same place. It really works. That doesn't change. It's into a new category. So we're going to try to find out the basis of smart thinking and ethics, which is the key to happiness. And what is happiness? Aristotle himself said we all agree on one thing. We all want to be happy. The problem is we disagree on what is it that makes you happy.
Isn't that where he takes off toward the golden mean, right?
Yes. Yeah. So what is it that makes us happy? What makes you happy? Oh, well, there's a film. Hey, what makes you happy? And this is important to every single person. And it's not some abstract college course that you can connect the dots and match the matching columns of what some word means. We're talking about a code of ethics as a basis of life, as opposed to utilitarianism, which is you just guess the best scenario at the second. Guy's going to go in through an operation, and the doctors are making inductions and deductions to find out what's best for him. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about there is a way to do something. Do you just kill somebody on the street and take their wallet for the hell of it? Some people might. We would call them psychopaths. But where does the rule come from? Where does the prohibition against doing this? It's not just the Bible. It's beyond that. It's the Tao. it's the good works in the Buddha. So all this stuff comes together into one discussion.
Yeah, and what you're saying there about happiness, Aristotle's concept of the golden mean is you have two extremes, and what you do is you try to find the middle ground between those two extremes, and that's kind of the first step in moving toward what he called happiness. And of course, that's also a biblical concept.
Yeah.
The Apostle Paul uses the Greek word for moderation, which indicates not extreme in either case, but fitting down. And then his standard, Paul's standard for what should be moderation, is what the Word of God says, because God will automatically give you a principle to live by that isn't either extreme. And he'll call you, and that basically, when we were studying the Ten Commandments, remember that? When we were studying the Ten Commandments, the commandments are actually the foundational rules. And then when you go all through the Bible trying to find out what is the right or wrong thing to do, you have statutes, ordinances, judgments, and all of these are taken out of one of those commandments. And Aristotle is focusing on the natural, as you mentioned earlier when we were talking about focusing on natural law. And if he focuses on natural law, and then as you and I have discussed in the Constitution, our founding fathers very strongly believed in natural law. Yeah. And the reason we're in the condition we're in today in our country is because nobody in Washington, D.C. believes in natural law.
There might be somebody.
Yeah. Well, remember I told you at the end of the book of Judges, there's a statement that illustrates how things have been so corrupted in politics in Israel. It says there was no king in the land, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. So what you have, if you have 10 people and they don't agree on a moral code, then each one of them is going to decide what is right for him at any given moment.
Exactly.
So that's the key to the whole thing. So the thing we looked at today then is where did we come from? And we've kind of touched a little bit on the second question, why am I here? The purpose. The purpose is to be able to find, implement, and enjoy the concept of happiness based on natural law, right?
Yes, and we're going to look at happiness. It's actually living in moderation to a large extent. I mean, you can't have moderation with respect to a moral imperative, right? And you can't say, well, okay, tomorrow I'll kill somebody. But there is a way to live within the parameters. It's almost like moderation is a directive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So today we talked about we're all tribal. We're the United States and other governments, especially in modern times, most of Europe has come to defend the individual, even though the oligarchies and the power structures still, suck the life out of them. There's still a legal and traditional basis for protecting the individual and the moral rights, and this is something that Mr. Putin didn't understand. Mm-hmm. He's surprised by the entire the world reacting to his tribalism. What he is doing is basic tribalism, obliterate a city, force everybody out, and take it over. Okay? This is no longer acceptable. Why?
Yeah.
This is what we're getting at.
So you've seen the first of at least 3 sessions dealing with...
more than that.
Well, yeah, it'll be more than that. But at least the first one, and we'll on the second one, we're going to explore purpose a little bit more, and we may even talk about what happens when you leave this world. What did the philosophers believe about it? What did they say about it? Right. And I'll be looking more at the biblical perspective. Gene will be looking more at what the philosophers of the world have concluded over time. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. Thank you. You want to do another one?
Sure.